I want to ask you also about current interest rate environment, inflation, and what you and your experts that you have on your show are saying about that, because no one has the perfect answer. But I mean, if anyone has their finger on the pulse, it's you. Once again, it's moneylifeshow.com, moneylifeshow, all one word.com, and I'll have that on my site. Can you step into the interest rate inflation world for us?
Yeah, I mean, we talk interest rates and inflation pretty much every day. It's almost impossible right now not to.
Right.
And there's very little question that the vast majority of people see the current interest rate problems as transitory. This is not, we've got shortages that have to work through the pipeline. We've got other issues that need to be handled, and they will be handled. And it's not necessarily that prices will go all the way back down to where they were, but it's not going to be, if you think about inflation the way anybody who is your age and my age might think about it in terms of what we saw in the 70s and 80s, that's not happening here. There's not that kind of pressure. If anything, and I had a pretty interesting recent conversation about this with a guy from J.O. Hambro Capital Management, where in this environment, we're so spring-loaded against inflation that it's fair to wonder if inflation is actually transitory. When the pressures ease, will we actually see deflation at that point? And it's not impossible. So, am I worried about inflation? I think there's a couple of things that people should know. The odd thing about inflation that most people don't recognize is that if you wanted to calculate inflation based on your experience, it would be different than CPI, because CPI basically breaks things down into 8 groups, 8 expense categories, and then it takes a multiplier, and it says the average person spends something like 31% of their money on shelter and shelter costs. So that's going to be your house or your rent or your mortgage, but it's also going to be homeowners insurance, et cetera, and all the other things that are affiliated with your house. And it's the average person spends 14% or whatever the number is on healthcare, and 5% or whatever it is on education. Okay, well now take somebody who is 75 years old. They've paid off their house. They're, maybe they've downsized, but they don't have the 33% shelter costs because they don't need that kind of thing, and they paid off their house. But they have way more than 14% in healthcare because they're visiting the doctor, to get their toenails cut, let alone anything else that they can't reach on their own bodies and whatever else. So if you break it out, if you took the inflation out and you said, okay, I'm just going to give you the multipliers, you put in your spending pattern, right? That 75-year-old, well, they're not that worried about entertainment inflation because they're not going out to movies and concerts and whatever too much. And they're not really worried about education inflation because whatever they give their grandkids is fine, but they're not paying for an education. They're super concerned about healthcare. They're less concerned about housing. And oh, by the way, what's happening to them in the grocery store, they're not eating as much, so it's kind of a wash. But the person who's 30 and has a family of 4, forget about it. They are right there. So inflation is very much a personalized thing. For years when we said, oh, inflation was low, any senior citizen would tell you, I'm getting crushed by my healthcare costs. And that's, so you could say, oh, inflation's not bad, but a lot of houses were, and a lot of households and homes were having trouble with inflation because of their spending patterns and where they are in life. And that's what we don't know about inflation. And that's where we all have to get to. I mean, we're going to see prices go up. It's costing you more at the grocery store. Yes, it is, at least for the time being. But again, if you're, an empty nester, me and the dog, I don't buy much in food. Like I buy, my monthly food budget is maybe what I spent in a week when my kids were young and here. Sure. So, inflation affects you differently. And as for interest rates, rates are not going to rise for the rest of this year. I'm not convinced that they'll rise until the second half of next year. And if the right things happen, it could be all the way out into 2023. But when rates go up, the market will respond badly. The question is for how long? I had a guest on my show, he appeared on my show the day that we're taping this, who was talking about how he actually thinks that you could see an interest rate hike sooner rather than later.
Hmm.
And yet his response to that was, okay, if it's not measured and it's not done in a lot of control, that could be a problem. And yet I wouldn't pull my money out of the market, and I would still be investing here because still the best place for your market for money is going to be domestic markets and big name, large company stocks. They will give you the safety and security, even if rates go up. So long term, I'm invested. Short term, I'm invested. And all the stuff about annuities and everything else is protecting yourself so that, oh, by the way,
Yeah.
when the market takes a downturn, you're comfortable to go, I can stick with my plan.
Hey, Stan the Annuity Man here. Did you like that little taste of my podcast, Fun with Annuities? Hey, if you want to see the full version, click the link and watch the whole darn thing. Remember, Fun with Annuities. Live in the reality, not the dream.